It was a normal Saturday afternoon, and the small town square was busier than usual. People were walking, shopping, and chatting. In the middle of the square, there was an old piano that had been placed there for anyone to play. It wasn't new, and some of the keys were a little sticky, but it had charm. A few people had tried it before, mostly children or amateur musicians, and the crowd around them was always polite but not very excited. Today, though, something different was about to happen. The boy walked slowly toward the piano. He wasn't dressed like someone who belonged in front of a crowd. His clothes were simple, slightly worn, and his shoes had seen better days. He carried himself quietly, almost as if he hoped no one would notice him. Yet there was something about the way he walked, slightly nervous but determined. He didn't know anyone here, and judging by the murmurs around him, it was clear the people watching weren't expecting anything special. A group of teenagers nearby snickered as he approached. "Look at him," one of them whispered loud enough for the others to hear. "He's going to ruin it for everyone." They laughed, pointing at his plain clothes and messy hair. Some of the adults rolled their eyes, thinking he probably wouldn't know how to play at all. People in the square had a habit of judging too quickly. They assumed that anyone who looked like him couldn't possibly have talent. Despite the whispers and stares, the boy didn't stop. He walked all the way to the piano and took a deep breath. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the keys, but he didn't move back. For a moment, it seemed like he might just walk away. The crowd waited, some impatient, some curious, and some still laughing quietly. But he stayed. He sat on the bench and rested his fingers above the keys. No one expected him to do much. A few of the teenagers whispered to each other, "This is going to be so bad." "Just wait." Some older people shook their heads, murmuring about wasting time on someone who didn't belong there. It was clear he had been underestimated before he even started. Then he pressed a key. It was soft, almost hesitant. The sound was simple, but it was clear he could play. The boy closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound guide him. Another note followed, and then another. Slowly, a melody started to form. At first, it was quiet, almost as if he was testing the piano, testing himself. The crowd didn't know what to make of it. Some people were still talking, some still laughing, but others began to pay attention. There was something about the music. It wasn't just notes. It carried emotion, a feeling that reached beyond the small square. The boy didn't open his eyes yet. His fingers moved carefully, but with confidence. He was focused, lost in the music, as if nothing else in the world existed. The laughter faded, the whispers stopped, and a strange silence began to spread among the crowd. People started to notice. His music wasn't loud or flashy, but it was beautiful in a way that felt honest and real. A little girl standing with her mother tugged at her hand and pointed toward the boy. "Mom, listen," she said. "He's really good." The mother stopped walking and listened, her eyes widening slightly. Around them, others began to do the same. The music had a soft power that made everyone pause. Even the teenagers who had mocked him stopped their whispers and stared. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. The boy opened his eyes just a little, glancing at the keys, then at the small crowd forming around him. He didn't look around at the people who had laughed. He didn't care. All that mattered was the music and the story it told through his fingers. With every note, he seemed to gain more confidence. His hands moved faster now, gliding over the keys with skill and ease. The melody grew richer, more complex, and more emotional. A man standing near the edge of the crowd muttered, "Wait, is he playing that by memory? Or is he improvising?" The words hung in the air. People began leaning closer, trying to hear every detail. Some of them took out their phones to record the moment, realizing that this wasn't just a simple performance. This was something rare. Something special. The teenagers who had mocked him before were now silent, their expressions shifting from amusement to disbelief. One of them whispered, I didn't think he could play like that." The boy didn't notice them. He wasn't playing for anyone's approval. He was playing because he loved it, because music had always been his way of speaking when words weren't enough. Every key he pressed told a story of struggle, of dreams, of hope. People began to gather more closely. Some older adults shook their heads, smiling in amazement. Others were holding their breath, afraid to interrupt the magic. The little girl tugged again at her mother's hand. "I want to learn music like him someday," she said softly. And at that moment, the boy's music wasn't just about him anymore. It was touching everyone who listened. The piano itself seemed to come alive under his fingers. Every note, every pause, every rhythm carried something powerful. The melody rose and fell, moving from soft and gentle to strong and commanding, and then back again. People felt emotions they hadn't expected to feel in a busy town square on a Saturday afternoon. Some felt joy, some sadness, and some just felt amazed. The boy didn't stop. He played as if he had been preparing for this moment his whole life. And in a way he had. Every day, every struggle, every moment of being underestimated had led him here, to this piano, in front of this crowd. He was showing the world that talent didn't come in fancy clothes or loud confidence. It could come from anyone. Anywhere, even from someone they had overlooked. Time seemed to slow down. People who had been rushing through their day now stopped completely. Some were leaning on benches, others were standing in place, and a few were even sitting on the steps just to listen. Everyone wanted to hear more, even those who had laughed at him before. The boy's fingers moved effortlessly, creating a melody that was both intricate and heartfelt. Finally, after what felt like minutes but was probably only a few moments, he paused. The last note hung in the air, echoing softly. The crowd was silent. No one moved. The magic of the moment held them still. Even the teenagers who had mocked him first looked around, unsure of how to react. They had been proven wrong in the most beautiful way. The boy opened his eyes fully and looked up at the people around him. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The music had spoken for him. Slowly, applause began to ripple through the crowd. At first, it was hesitant, but then it grew louder, stronger. People clapped, cheered, and some even whistled. The little girl clapped the hardest, smiling wide, and the mother next to her smiled too, tears glistening in her eyes. The boy stood and gave a small, shy bow. He didn't boast or call attention to himself. He simply let the music do the talking. The people who had mocked him before now looked embarrassed, but there was also respect in their eyes. They had underestimated him completely, and he had proved them wrong in the most remarkable way. And just like that, what had started as a normal Saturday afternoon became something unforgettable. The boy had taken a chance, faced judgment, and shared his gift with the world. He had reminded everyone that sometimes the most incredible talent comes from the most unexpected places. Even after he walked away from the piano, people continued to talk about what had just happened. Some replayed the melody in their heads. Some couldn't stop smiling. And for a few, it was a lesson they would never forget. Never judge someone by their appearance, because you might just miss the magic they are capable of creating. The piano sat quietly after he left, still waiting for the next person. But everyone who had listened that day knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. And for the boy, it wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about sharing what he loved, touching hearts with his music, and proving to himself that he could overcome doubt and fear. That was the beginning. A beginning that would change not only his life, but the lives of everyone who had been there to witness it. And while some people would talk about the performance for days, the boy quietly walked home, carrying with him a feeling that no applause could ever match, the feeling of having been true to himself and his passion. After that first performance, the square seemed different. The air was still, almost as if it was holding its breath, waiting to see what the boy would do next. People who had been walking by now stopped and leaned closer, curious. Some had already taken out their phones, hoping to capture whatever came next. There was a quiet tension in the crowd, a mixture of anticipation and awe. No one had expected the boy to play like that the first time, and now everyone was waiting to see if it would happen again. The boy sat back at the piano. He didn't rush. He let the silence stretch for a few moments, closing his eyes again. The first time had been soft, gentle, almost like an introduction. But now he wanted to show more. He wanted to tell a story through the music, a story that went beyond just simple notes. He wasn't thinking about the crowd, the whispers, or the laughter that had come before. His focus was entirely on the piano, on the music flowing through his fingers. Then slowly he began to play again. This time it wasn't soft or hesitant. The first notes were firm, confident, and carried a rhythm that drew everyone's attention immediately. People leaned in closer, some holding their breath. The teenagers who had mocked him before looked at each other, their expressions a mix of surprise and disbelief. "Wait, he's actually good," one whispered quietly, afraid the boy would hear. The melody grew richer and more intricate. Each note seemed carefully chosen, yet flowed naturally, like it had always existed in the air, waiting for someone to play it. The boy's fingers moved with grace, dancing across the keys. He changed the tempo, softening it in one moment, then striking stronger notes the next. The music told a story without words of struggle, of hope, of quiet determination. People began to stop in their tracks. A man carrying groceries paused, holding the bags midair, captivated. A woman pushing a stroller stopped, her eyes widening. Even the little girl who had clapped before couldn't move. She was leaning on her mother, listening intently. The boy's music was no longer just a performance, it was an experience. The crowd had grown silently. More people had gathered, some running from nearby streets just to see what was happening. Phones recorded the moment, but no one was speaking. The atmosphere had changed completely. There was no laughter, no mocking. The boy had transformed the square into a space of wonder. The music was reaching inside everyone, stirring emotions they hadn't expected to feel that afternoon. With every passing second, his confidence grew. He played faster now, with precision, yet every note carried emotion. Some of the adults began to recognize the skill in his fingers. They whispered to each other, "He's not just talented. He's amazing." A few musicians in the crowd shook their heads in quiet disbelief. This was beyond casual talent. This was something special, rare. The boy's eyes were closed again, and he was completely in the music. He didn't notice the people filming or the expressions of awe on their faces. He wasn't playing for applause. He wasn't playing to impress anyone. He was playing because the music was a part of him, a voice for the feelings he couldn't always express with words. Suddenly the melody shifted. It became deeper, more emotional, almost haunting. Some in the crowd felt a lump in their throats. They weren't just listening. They were feeling every note. The music spoke of struggles no one could see, the struggles the boy himself had faced, the times he had been mocked, underestimated, and ignored. It was as if he had poured all of that into the piano, and the crowd was witnessing it firsthand. A young man standing near the front of the crowd muttered, "I didn't think anyone could play like this. Especially not him." Others nodded quietly, their eyes glued to the boy's hands. Every movement, every touch of the keys seemed intentional, like each note was carefully placed to touch the hearts of everyone listening. The little girl clutched her mother's hand tightly. "Mom, it's like he's telling a story," she whispered. Her mother smiled softly, her eyes glistening. She had seen many performances in her life, but nothing had ever made her feel this way. She realized this wasn't just music, it was emotion made audible. A connection between the boy and everyone who was listening. Even the teenagers who had laughed at him before couldn't hide their amazement. One of them whispered, almost in awe, "I can't believe I made fun of him." His friends nodded silently, their faces a mix of regret and wonder. They had thought this would be an easy joke, a moment to make someone feel small. Instead, they were witnessing something extraordinary. The boy didn't pause. He transitioned smoothly into a faster, more energetic section of the piece. His fingers moved with speed and precision, yet every note was clear, expressive, and full of life. The crowd watched in stunned silence, unable to tear their eyes away. Some were nodding along to the rhythm, completely absorbed in the performance. Others had tears in their eyes, moved by the emotion carried in the music. A man standing at the edge of the crowd, who had been a music teacher decades ago, whispered softly, "This boy, he has the soul of a true musician. I've never seen talent like this in someone so young." He looked around, noticing others' reactions. Everyone was captivated. The boy had taken something ordinary, a public piano in a town square, and turned it into a moment no one would forget. The music reached a high point. The boy's hands flew over the keys, creating a sound that was both complex and beautiful. The rhythm was fast now, but controlled. Every note felt like it had a purpose, every pause a deliberate choice. People gasped softly, moved by the intensity of the performance. Some covered their mouths, unable to believe what they were hearing. Others had tears running down their faces, overwhelmed by the power of the music. Even after playing such a fast and intricate section, he didn't stop abruptly. He let the music flow into a softer, slower section, full of emotion. It was as if he were telling a story of struggle and triumph, of moments of doubt followed by determination. People leaned closer, listening intently as if afraid to miss a single note. The little girl whispered to her mother again, "He's amazing! He's telling us his story." The boy's eyes remained closed for most of the performance, but at times he would glance up at the crowd. He wasn't seeking approval. He was simply aware of the people who were listening, aware of the magic that had been created through his music. There was no arrogance, no showmanship, just pure, heartfelt expression. As the piece neared its end, the music became soft again, almost like a gentle whisper. The boy's fingers glided over the keys delicately, creating a feeling of peace after the intensity of the faster section. The crowd leaned in, waiting for the final note, holding their breath in anticipation. The last note echoed through the square, soft and lingering, and then silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The music had left them in awe. The boy had not just played a melody, he had told a story, shared a piece of his soul, and captured the hearts of everyone listening. Slowly, the crowd began to clap. At first, softly, almost hesitant, and then louder, stronger, until the entire square was filled with applause. People cheered, whistled, and some even stood to give him a standing ovation. The teenagers who had mocked him before looked at each other, ashamed but impressed. They had learned a lesson they would not forget: never judge someone by their appearance or background. Talent and passion could be hidden in the most unexpected places. The boy smiled faintly, a shy but genuine smile. He stood and gave a small bow, acknowledging the crowd. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The music had spoken for him. People around him were still clapping, some wiping tears from their eyes, some shaking their heads in disbelief. They had been witnesses to something extraordinary. And even as the applause continued, the boy quietly stepped away from the piano. He didn't linger, didn't seek more attention. He had shared his music, told his story, and touched the hearts of everyone who had listened. That was enough. The square would not be the same after today. People would remember this performance for a long time. And the boy had shown them that sometimes the most incredible things come from the most unexpected places. He walked through the crowd, unnoticed by some, remembered by all who had truly listened. The piano sat quietly behind him, waiting for the next person. But everyone who had heard the boy play that day knew they had witnessed something remarkable. And for the boy, it wasn't about fame or praise or recognition. It was about expressing himself, sharing his gift, and proving to himself that he could rise above doubt and fear. That day was only the beginning. A beginning that would change not only his life, but the lives of everyone who had stopped to listen. And as he disappeared into the streets, people continued talking, replaying the melody in their heads, inspired by the story the boy had told through music. It was a story of talent, determination, and the power of being true to yourself, one that no one in the square would ever forget. After his second performance, the boy left the piano for a short moment, letting the applause fade and giving the crowd a chance to breathe. But something had changed. People were no longer just curious, they were captivated. They had seen glimpses of talent, but now they wanted more. They wanted to know how far his skill could go, how deep his music could touch them. The square was alive with expectation, and the boy felt it, though he didn't show it. He simply returned to the piano, took a deep breath, and prepared for what he knew would be the most important part of his performance. He sat down on the bench again, but this time there was no hesitation. His fingers hovered above the keys for a brief moment, as if gathering energy from the air around him. The crowd was completely silent, leaning in, waiting for the first note. Even the teenagers who had mocked him before were standing quietly, eyes fixed on his hands. They had never seen anything like this before, and they knew that this was different from anything they had ever imagined. The boy pressed the first key, and it rang out clearly. But unlike before, this note was heavy with emotion. It wasn't just the sound of a piano, it was a message. The melody began slowly, almost mournfully, but as it grew, it carried layers of feeling. People in the crowd could feel it. Some felt a lump in their throat. Others felt their hearts beat faster, caught up in the music's rhythm. The boy's fingers moved with a control and precision that seemed impossible. Every note was deliberate, every pause meaningful. He began to play a piece that was complex, weaving fast sections with slower, softer parts. It was like a conversation in sound, sometimes urgent and passionate, sometimes calm and reflective. The music was alive, telling a story of struggle, hope, and triumph without a single word. People who had been walking by stopped completely. Some were leaning on benches. Others sat on the ground to focus entirely on the sound. The boy was no longer just playing a piano. He was painting feelings in the air, creating something that couldn't be ignored. The teenagers who had mocked him before looked at each other in disbelief. One whispered, I don't even know what to say. He's incredible. They were no longer laughing. They were speechless. They had thought this would be easy, thought he would embarrass himself, and now they realized they had been completely wrong. The boy's music had completely changed their perspective, and they couldn't help but feel respect mixed with awe. The melody grew more emotional. It moved from sadness to hope, rising and falling like waves on a calm sea suddenly stirred by a storm. The boy's expression showed concentration, but also a kind of quiet joy. He wasn't playing for anyone's approval, he was playing because this music had been inside him for years. Every struggle, every moment he had been mocked, every time someone underestimated him, all of it fueled the emotion behind his performance. A woman standing in the crowd whispered to her friend, "It's like he's speaking directly to us. I can feel what he's feeling." Others nodded silently, unable to take their eyes off him. The little girl who had clapped earlier was leaning closer to her mother, holding her hand tightly. "Mom, he's amazing. He's telling a story through the piano," she said softly. The mother smiled, eyes glistening with tears. She had heard many kinds of music in her life, but this was something she had never experienced before. The boy shifted into a faster section, fingers moving with incredible speed, yet with complete control. The notes were complex, almost daring the listeners to follow, and the crowd did. People were mesmerized, watching the rhythm and movement of his hands as if they were part of the story. Some even felt their own hearts racing, caught up in the energy and passion of the music. As the fast section ended, the boy returned to a softer, slower melody. It was delicate, almost fragile, yet it carried deep emotion. The contrast between the fast and slow sections made the performance feel alive, like the music was breathing along with him. People leaned closer, some covering their mouths in awe, some closing their eyes to focus entirely on the sound. The little girl whispered again, "It's like magic." "Mom," her mother nodded silently, unable to speak. Overwhelmed by the power of the music, the boy's performance wasn't just about technique. Anymore, it was about expression. He was telling the story of his life, of moments that no one could see, of feelings he had never shared with anyone. Every note, every pause, every gentle touch of the keys carried a message. People in the crowd could sense it. Some were moved to tears, some were smiling quietly, and some were simply frozen, completely absorbed in the moment, even the musicians in the crowd. People who had studied music for years were stunned. They whispered to each other, "He's beyond anything I've ever seen." His control, his emotion. It's rare to find someone who can combine both so perfectly. They were not exaggerating. What the boy was doing was extraordinary. He had transformed a simple town square into a stage for a performance that felt like it belonged in a grand concert hall. As the piece continued, the boy began to add subtle improvisations. Tiny variations in the melody, unexpected chords, delicate flourishes, it all came naturally, as if the piano itself was responding to his emotions. The crowd was completely silent again, holding their breath. They knew they were witnessing something rare, something that didn't happen every day. This boy, who had been mocked and underestimated just moments ago, was now commanding the attention and admiration of everyone around him. The teenagers who had laughed at him earlier were now standing quietly, mouths slightly open, watching in awe. One whispered, almost to himself, "I can't believe I ever made fun of him. I didn't know someone could play like this." His friends nodded silently, feeling a mix of embarrassment and admiration. They had learned a lesson that they would never forget. Talent and passion are not defined by appearance or status. The boy didn't look at them, though. He didn't play for revenge or recognition. He played because the music was inside him, because it was the way he expressed what he felt. Every note carried years of practice, years of being ignored, and years of determination. The crowd could feel it. Some were nodding along with the rhythm, some were closing their eyes, and some were simply frozen, absorbing every sound. The music began to slow, returning to a softer, more reflective tone. It was as if the boy was taking the crowd on a journey through his heart. The intensity of the previous sections gave way to something more emotional, more intimate. People felt themselves drawn into the story, feeling the highs and lows of the music as if they were part of his life. A man standing at the back of the crowd whispered softly, "He's not just playing the piano, he's speaking to our hearts." Others nodded in agreement. They had been expecting simple entertainment, but what they were witnessing was much more. It was raw, real, and deeply moving. The boy had taken their expectations and completely transformed them. The little girl clutched her mother's hand tightly, whispering again, "I want to play music like him someday." Her mother smiled, tears in her eyes. She realized that this moment was teaching more than just admiration for talent. It was teaching courage, perseverance, and the power of believing in oneself. Even when others doubt you. As the final notes approached, the boy's fingers glided over the keys delicately. The melody was soft, lingering, and full of emotion. The crowd leaned in, listening carefully. Every ear was focused on the sound, every heart was connected to the music. The last note rang out, pure and clear, and then silence. For a few moments no one moved. The magic of the performance held them still. The boy had not just played a melody, he had told a story, shared a part of himself, and touched the hearts of everyone listening. Then slowly applause began. At first it was hesitant, but then it grew louder, stronger, until the entire square was filled with clapping, cheering, and whistles. People were standing, some wiping tears from their eyes, some shaking their heads in disbelief. The teenagers who had mocked him before looked at each other, their expressions filled with respect and awe. They had been proven wrong in the most remarkable way. The boy had shown them, and everyone else, that talent, passion, and courage can't be measured by appearances or assumptions. The boy smiled faintly, a quiet but genuine smile. He stood and gave a small bow. He didn't say a word. The music had spoken for him. The crowd continued to clap, some cheering, some whistling, some simply shaking their heads in wonder. They had witnessed something extraordinary, something they would never forget. And as he stepped away from the piano, quietly walking through the crowd, he carried with him not just the applause, but the satisfaction of having shared his music, his story, and his heart. The square had been transformed. People would remember this day for a long time, inspired by the boy who had turned simple notes into something unforgettable. That day, the boy had done more than perform. He had proven that being underestimated doesn't define you, that courage, persistence, and passion can overcome doubt, and that sometimes the most extraordinary talent can be found where people least expect it. After the boy's extraordinary performance, the crowd was buzzing with excitement, but many people couldn't stop thinking about the person behind the music. Who was he? Where had he learned to play so beautifully? How could someone who looked so ordinary create something so extraordinary? While the applause faded and people slowly returned to their lives, A few curious onlookers stayed behind, hoping to understand the story of the boy at the piano. The boy, meanwhile, walked quietly away from the square. He wasn't running from the attention, but he didn't seek it either. For him, the music had already spoken everything he wanted to say. But as he walked, his mind was filled with memories of the journey that had brought him to this very moment. He remembered the small apartment where he had grown up. It wasn't fancy. The walls were plain, and there were often sounds of arguing or silence that made the place feel heavy. Money was always tight, and luxuries like music lessons or expensive instruments were impossible. Yet, from a young age, he had felt drawn to sound, the way notes could rise and fall, how music could carry emotion that words couldn't. He would tap on furniture, hum melodies, and sometimes create small tunes with makeshift instruments. Music was his escape, his comfort, and his secret world. One day when he was very young, his parents had brought home an old, dusty piano from a neighbor who was moving away. It wasn't perfect, many keys were chipped, and some didn't work at all, but it was enough for him to begin. Every day after school, he would sit there for hours, practicing, experimenting, and learning. He had no teacher, no guide, no one to correct mistakes. But he had patience, determination, and a love for music that could not be shaken. He remembered the nights when he would play quietly, hoping no one would hear. Sometimes his parents didn't understand why he spent so much time on the piano. They thought it was a waste of time, something that wouldn't help him in life. But he didn't care. Every note he played brought him joy. Every melody he discovered felt like a secret treasure, something he had found and nurtured all on his own. As he grew older, things didn't get easier. People around him often mocked him, underestimated him, and told him he couldn't succeed. Teachers said he should focus on more practical things. Classmates laughed at his passion, and strangers dismissed him without knowing his story. There were times when he wanted to give up, times when the loneliness of being misunderstood felt unbearable. But every time he sat at the piano, all of that disappeared. The music reminded him that he had something special, something that no one could take away. He also remembered the small victories along the way. The first time he learned a challenging piece by himself. The first time someone complimented him quietly, saying, "You have talent." The first time he performed in front of even a tiny audience, seeing their surprised faces. Those moments fueled him, teaching him that perseverance mattered more than anyone's opinion. Slowly, he realized that his love for music was stronger than fear, doubt, or mockery. The boy had faced many obstacles, but he had also learned a lot. He learned to listen carefully, to feel the emotion in every note, to understand how music could tell a story without words. He had learned to be patient, to practice in silence when no one was watching, and to trust in his own abilities. Each hardship had shaped him, each challenge had strengthened him, and each moment of doubt had made his determination even stronger. That day, in the town square, all of those experiences came together. Every note he played, every melody he created, every emotion he poured into the piano was the result of years of practice, struggle, and persistence. The crowd could feel it, even if they didn't know the story behind it. Music has a way of speaking directly to people's hearts, and his heart had guided his fingers through every part of the performance. As the crowd began to clap after his second performance, some people tried to approach him, asking questions. "How long have you been playing?" one asked. Another whispered, "Where did you learn music like that?" But the boy only smiled faintly and walked on. He didn't need to explain himself. The music had already told the story far better than words ever could. A few people in the crowd began to connect the dots. They realized that his extraordinary skill didn't come from expensive lessons or fancy schools. It came from resilience, dedication, and a love for what he did. They saw that this boy, who had seemed ordinary at first glance, had spent years honing his craft in silence, fighting against the odds and believing in himself when no one else did. That realization made his performance even more impressive. Even the teenagers who had mocked him were now thoughtful. One of them said quietly to a friend, "He's not just talented. He's worked for this. He's earned it." And in that moment they understood the truth behind the magic they had just witnessed. Talent alone isn't enough. Hard work, persistence, and passion are what create greatness. The boy continued to walk through the streets, reflecting on how far he had come. From practicing alone on a broken piano to performing in front of a crowd that had once underestimated him, his journey had been anything but easy. And yet, every challenge had prepared him for this moment. He understood that life often underestimates people. And that's when true strength and talent are revealed. When no one expects it, he also thought about the people who had laughed at him before, the ones who whispered behind his back, and the ones who didn't believe in him. He didn't feel anger. Instead, he felt a quiet satisfaction. They had judged him too soon, just as the world often does. But he had shown that being underestimated doesn't mean you are weak. It simply means that when the moment comes, you can surprise everyone with what you're truly capable of. Back in the town square, some of the adults who had been watching began to share his story with others. They talked about the quiet boy who had transformed a simple piano into a stage for extraordinary music. They shared how he had faced ridicule, doubt, and hardship, yet still created something unforgettable. And slowly, people began to realize that this boy's story was more than a performance. It was an inspiration. Even the little girl who had clutched her mother's hand earlier whispered to everyone she met, "He showed me that if you love something and keep working at it, you can do amazing things." Her mother smiled, proud of her daughter's insight. The boy's music had done more than entertain. It had inspired hope, courage, and the belief that anyone can overcome challenges and rise above doubt. The boy's journey wasn't over, though. He knew there would be more challenges, more obstacles, and more people who might underestimate him in the future. But he also knew that each challenge would make him stronger. Each obstacle would prepare him for the next step, and each moment of doubt from others would only remind him to trust himself. He had learned that true talent isn't just about skill, it's about heart, persistence, and the courage to keep going even when the world doubts you. As he walked home that evening, the streets quiet and the sky painted in shades of orange and pink from the sunset, he felt a sense of peace. He had shared his music, touched hearts, and shown the world a piece of his story. And though the crowd didn't know every detail of his life, they could feel the truth behind the notes, the struggles, the hope, the determination, and the unwavering love for music that had carried him this far. That day in the square was not just a performance. It was a turning point. It was proof that being underestimated doesn't define you. That talent, when paired with passion and hard work, can shine through even the darkest times. And that sometimes the most extraordinary stories are hidden in ordinary-looking people, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. The boy had begun as someone overlooked, ignored, and mocked. But through years of practice, perseverance, and love for his craft, he had created something that no one would ever forget. And while he didn't know what the future held, he understood one thing clearly: the music he played was a reflection of who he was, and it had the power to inspire anyone who listened. He reached the small apartment he called home and paused for a moment. He looked back at the streets he had walked that day, the square where so many had gathered, and the piano that had become a stage for his dreams. A quiet smile crossed his face. Every struggle, every moment of doubt, and every lonely hour spent practicing had led him here. And he knew, deep in his heart, that this was just the beginning of a journey that would continue to unfold, note by note, melody by melody, inspiring everyone who had the chance to listen. That evening, the boy sat by his window, the soft glow of the streetlights outside reflecting in his eyes. He didn't play the piano that night. He didn't need to. The music had already spoken, and for him it had said everything. But he knew tomorrow, and the day after, would bring more opportunities to share his gift, to touch more hearts, and to remind the world that true talent often hides where no one expects it. And in that quiet moment, the boy felt a sense of purpose stronger than ever before. The journey had been difficult, and the world had underestimated him countless times. But now, for the first time, he felt the beginning of something extraordinary, a chance to show the world that passion, perseverance, and heart can overcome every doubt, every fear, and every obstacle in life. The next morning, the town square looked normal, quiet, almost as if nothing extraordinary had happened the day before. People were going about their daily routines. But for those who had been present to witness the boy's performance, nothing would ever feel normal again. The memory of his music lingered in their minds like a warm echo. Every note, every pause, every emotion he had poured into the piano had left an impression they could not forget. Word spread quickly. People who had walked by after the performance began sharing the story with friends and neighbors. "Did you hear about the boy at the piano?" they would ask. "He played something incredible. You have to see him." Soon, more and more people wanted to know who he was, how he had learned to play, and why someone so young and seemingly ordinary could create music that touched hearts so deeply. The boy, meanwhile, returned to the square quietly. He didn't go for the applause or attention. He went because the piano called to him and because he wanted to keep playing, to keep sharing his gift. As he approached, a few people gathered, hoping to see him again. The piano had become a symbol, a place where magic could happen, and the boy had become the reason for that magic. He sat down, fingers hovering above the keys. This time, there was a different energy in the air. The crowd that had gathered was no longer skeptical or mocking. They were full of anticipation, respect, and excitement. Some were whispering quietly, "He's coming back." Others simply stood silently, letting the music speak for itself. The boy took a deep breath, and slowly the first notes began to flow. His music this time was different from before. It was not just technical skill or a display of speed. It was deeper, more mature, filled with emotion and understanding beyond his years. The crowd could feel it immediately. The melody seemed to embrace every person in the square, wrapping them in a story of resilience, hope, and triumph. Even those who had doubted him before were now completely captivated. A woman standing near the back whispered to her friend, "He's not just talented. He's extraordinary. Look at the way he plays, he's telling a story." The little girl from before clutched her mother's hand and smiled, feeling inspired. She whispered, "I want to play music like him someday." The mother nodded, feeling a mix of pride and awe. The boy's music had a way of inspiring everyone, regardless of age, background, or experience. As he continued, more people stopped to listen. Some had come intentionally, having heard about his performance the day before. Others were passing by and felt drawn to the piano, unable to resist the emotion carried in each note. Phones were raised, recording the moment, but many people realized that no video could capture the depth of feeling in the performance. It was something that had to be felt in person, something that went beyond sight and sound. The boy's fingers moved with confidence and grace. He played faster sections, slower sections, and everything in between. Every note seemed to have been chosen with care, every pause timed perfectly. The music told a story that no one in the crowd had heard before. Some felt joy, some sadness, and some felt a mix of emotions they couldn't put into words. The boy had the power to move people in a way that few could, and the crowd was completely immersed. Among the crowd were people who had experience with music teachers, performers, and lifelong enthusiasts. They whispered among themselves, amazed by what they were witnessing. "He's beyond skill. He understands the heart of music," one said. "This isn't just talent. This is something rare, something special." Even they could not deny that the boy had achieved something extraordinary. Then a man approached from the crowd. He was older, dressed neatly, and carried a kind but serious expression. People whispered, wondering who he was. The man stopped near the boy and said in a calm, respectful voice, "I've been watching you play. You have something rare. Have you ever considered performing for a larger audience or receiving training to refine your skills even further?" The boy paused, looking up at the man. He had never expected someone to offer him an opportunity like this. The crowd watched in silence, sensing the importance of the moment. The man continued, "I work with a music academy, and we help young talents like you reach their full potential. I would like to give you a chance to study and perform, to share your music with the world." The boy's eyes widened. He had dreamed of such a moment for years, but never thought it would come so suddenly or so easily. For the first time, he felt that his music could take him beyond the small town square. People around him began to whisper excitedly, Some nodded in encouragement, others smiled with admiration. The boy didn't answer immediately. He took a deep breath, letting the reality sink in. He thought of all the hours he had spent practicing alone, the times he had been mocked, the doubts he had faced. And now, finally, someone recognized his gift and wanted to help him grow, slowly. He nodded, a quiet but firm gesture of acceptance. The man smiled and shook his hand, congratulating him. The crowd erupted in applause, louder and more heartfelt than ever before. People cheered, clapped, and whistled. Some even stood on benches to get a better view. They had witnessed not just a performance, but a turning point in the boy's life. The boy returned to the piano one more time, playing a short piece as a gesture of gratitude. Each note was soft, emotional, and sincere. The crowd listened quietly, some with tears in their eyes. They knew they were part of something special, something that would be remembered long after the day ended. The boy had turned a moment of doubt and underestimation into triumph, and everyone could feel the power of his story through his music. As the performance ended, the crowd slowly dispersed, but the energy in the square lingered. People continued talking about the boy and the music he had played. They shared stories, described the emotions they had felt, and praised his courage, persistence, and talent. The little girl held her mother's hand and whispered again, "I'm going to practice music every day, just like him." The mother smiled. Realizing that the boy's influence would reach far beyond the square, the man from the music academy helped the boy pack up and walk to a nearby office to discuss the next steps. They talked about training, future performances, and opportunities to grow his skills even further. The boy listened carefully, absorbing every word. For years he had dreamed of something like this, and now it was becoming real. The thought of performing for larger audiences, of sharing his music beyond the small town, filled him with excitement and hope. As he left the square, the boy glanced back at the piano one last time. It had been the place where everything changed, the place where he had been underestimated, laughed at, and ignored, and yet had proven his talent to the world. He smiled quietly to himself, knowing that the piano would always hold a special place in his journey. It was the beginning of something extraordinary, a symbol of courage, determination, and passion. That evening, as he walked home, he reflected on how far he had come. From the small apartment where he practiced alone, to the quiet streets, to the crowded square filled with people who had once doubted him, every step had been part of his journey. He realized that the obstacles he had faced were not setbacks but preparation. They had strengthened him, taught him resilience, and made the triumphs even more meaningful. He entered his home and sat quietly, thinking about the future. There would be challenges ahead, more performances, more people to impress, and more opportunities to grow. But he felt ready. The music had guided him this far, and it would continue to guide him. He had learned that true talent isn't just about skill, it's about heart, determination, and the courage to pursue your passion even when others doubt you. The next day, word of his performance and recognition spread even further. People from nearby towns heard about the boy and the incredible music he had played. Some journalists came to interview him, curious about his story. Local musicians offered advice and support. Everyone wanted to know more about the boy who had been underestimated, mocked, and yet had stunned an entire crowd with his talent. Through it all, the boy remained humble. He didn't seek fame or attention. He simply wanted to play, to share his gift, and to inspire others. People admired him not just for his skill, but for his humility, his perseverance, and the way he had overcome doubt and judgment to follow his passion. His story became an inspiration, a reminder that true talent can come from anywhere, and that belief in yourself can overcome even the harshest of critics. As weeks and months passed, the boy began to perform in larger venues, take lessons to refine his skills, and share his music with more people. Each performance was a step forward, a chance to reach more hearts, and a way to honor the journey that had brought him here. The crowd that had once underestimated him was now cheering him on, proud to have witnessed the beginning of his incredible story. And so, the boy who had been mocked, underestimated, and overlooked became a symbol of courage, talent, and perseverance. His music had the power to change lives, to inspire hope, and to remind people that anyone can achieve greatness if they believe in themselves and never give up. The piano in the town square would always be remembered, but the boy's journey had only just begun.